Okay, what's going on, everybody? I want to take a look at Forspoken today, and reason is that I wanted to compare FSR 3 with AMD Fluid Motion Frame and kind of what I think about it, because I've been messing around with this game this morning looking at FSR 3, and I wanted to point out a few things that have stood out to me about this game. Okay, and we'll kind of get into that right now. I'm going to compare FSR 3 frame generation with native, what I think about it, and we're also going to toss in the AMD Fluid Motion Frame, the driver FSR 3, right? See how that compares. So first, let's start with the settings. We're running the game at 4K. Go to display here, 4K, 120 FPS cap, VSync off, and graphics. We're running native AA for FSR Super Resolution. Frame generation is off right now. And the only thing we have disabled is ray trace shadows, because I want to have a 60 base frame rate for native. No nonsense, right? Okay. Now, I did watch Daniel Owen's video as far as turning FSR 3 does disable variable refresh rate, which I'm not a big fan of that. But I also noticed that enabling AMD Fluid Motion Frame also does the same thing, because I'm using a C1 LG C1 48-inch, and I have the overlay enabled, and that's essentially what I see. So right now we're getting 60 frames per second, and if I look at my TV, it says that it's 60 frames per second or 61. It's perfectly synced with what I'm seeing on the screen, and I kind of like to pan the camera around like this with a controller, because it's the motion is steady, and it kind of gives you a good look, an idea how fluid the game is. And to me, this actually feels very fluid. I would play the game like this. Actually, I beat the game. I kind of enjoyed the combat in it. Writing was a bit cringe, but I overall enjoyed playing through the game. But that's besides the point. I digress. Anyway, so yeah, moving the camera around like this, the game looks and feels perfectly smooth, right? I mean, we got pretty complex geometry back there. It looks pretty good. Now, let's turn on FSR 3 frame generation, and I'll kind of give out some of my thoughts and a couple things that stood out to me. Okay, so we're going to stay on native and turn on frame generation. Okay. And now we're up to 106, 105 frames per second. And now moving the camera in the same similar way, I mean, to me this doesn't feel like it's 110 or 112 frames per second. And if you look at the NPCs, for example, as the camera's moving, it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever experienced double vision or if you've been like extremely drunk. It kind of looks like that. Like Frey, the protagonist, she looks fine, and a lot of the objects look okay, but the NPCs and the complex geometry, like especially up there, if you look up there on the white stone and the entranceway on the top, when I move the camera left and right, it's like almost like everything is like doubled when you pan the camera around. And now, I don't know, I've tried turning VSync on and off in the game, because that's really all you can do. So right now VSync is off. We'll try turning it on and see if that makes a difference of any kind. See, this actually does make it worse. It does introduce a bit of tearing. It looks like if I look at the top, while I move the camera left and right, I can see a little bit of tearing in some parts of the image. Not all. So that's kind of strange somehow. But anyway, yeah, let's try turning frame generation off, and we'll try the AMD Fluid Motion Frame, the one that's built into the driver. That one's actually kind of interesting. Now, to be able to see that frame rate, we're going to have to enable the AMD overlay metrics. So let's turn AMD Fluid Motion Frames. Okay, here we go. Now you'll notice the frame rate hasn't changed. If you look at the Riva Tuner statistics server, that's because that is not showing the generated frames. If you look at the bottom, that's the AMD metrics overlay. So we're getting 112, 110 frames per second right now. So that's showing the total frames that are being pumped into the screen that I'm looking at, okay? So now I don't know how this recording is going to come through. Obviously, it's being recorded at 60 and YouTube only allows 60. So that's kind of why I wanted to do this live, right? I haven't really done this before. So okay, quick pause. I'm adding this in editing because I just noticed it. So the visual issues that I'm going to be pointing out here, you're not really going to be able to see them, because what I think is happening is the recording, the 60 FPS recording, is capturing the actual frames. So the 56, and maybe it's capturing some of the generated frames, but you can't really see them in this recording. But what I'm explaining is actually there on my screen. So back to the video. Now, yeah, this does not look that great. I think the geometry is a bit too complex. So when I move the camera left and right, it's almost like there's like doubling and jiggling of certain aspects of that stone wall in the back there. Or even if you look at the top, you know, that tower there, parts of it almost like glitch left and right. But the weird thing is that it, like moving the camera like this, it actually feels more fluid than it did with FSR 3 frame generation to me. Like this actually looks more fluid, panning back and forth. It doesn't look as good. There's definitely some screen issues here. I mean, it's being done in driver. It's not going to be as good, obviously. And here's one more comparison that I wanted to show, basically. Now we're getting around 90 to 100 frames with frame generation on. If we just go to FSR quality, we'll be getting a similar frame rate, maybe a little less, right? 90. Now, I will do a side-by-side of this in a second, and maybe it'll come through the video. 90 frames per second, if you move the camera around just like this, this actually, to me, feels, the fluidity feels like 90 frames per second, except for the little tiny stutter here and there. But this actually feels like 90 frames per second, whereas with the frame generation on, it doesn't. It almost feels like the base frame rate, to me anyway. I don't know. I mean, if you guys have experienced this and have come to a similar conclusion, let me know. We'll try it. We'll do a side by side and see if maybe it'll pop up on the video. I'm not sure if it will or not. Okay, so to sum up what I think about FSR 3. First, what you're actually seeing on the screen is not really exactly what I'm seeing on the screen, meaning that it's being recorded at 60, YouTube only shows 60. So with FSR 3, DLSS 3, or the Fluid Motion Frame, the driver feature, you pretty much have to experience it yourself to really see what it's like. Not even Digital Foundry will be able to show you exactly what it feels like unless you try it yourself. Now, what do I think? I think it's pretty impressive technology. I think AMD has done a pretty good job. That said, there is some flaws, if you will, that I'd like to see change if it's even possible. So I don't like the fact that variable refresh rate gets disabled. For example, you can't really cap the frame rate. I tried capping the frame rate with the frame rate target control feature AMD have added in driver, and that doesn't really work. It turned into a stuttery mess with that. And the only way to do it on NVIDIA, which I have a bit of experience with frame generation there, is that you have to enable VSync on the control panel, which is how I've done it, and then put a frame rate cap through the driver. And that's how I play Cyberpunk, actually. On my 4090, I've been playing it with path tracing enabled on a 3440 by 1440 display, and I get around 60 to 70 to 80 real frames with DLSS on quality. And then when I enable frame generation, it essentially compensates for the rest of the frames so that I maintain a 100 FPS cap. And I think that's important because this type of technology can be used to each individual's liking, right? You might not want a bunch of generated frames, and you might want to keep latency to as much of a minimum as you want, right? And that's kind of how I've been using it. But with this here, it seems like once you toggle frame generation on, you know, you get a nice boost to frame rate. But what if that goes over your display's refresh rate? You know, you could run into tearing and those type of issues. So I don't like the fact that variable refresh rate gets removed, but this is just a brief look. So if you guys have any thoughts or any suggestions, you know, how we can tweak it, I would love to hear about it. And this is the only game that I've looked at. I haven't looked at Immortals of Avium yet, and that'll be I'll be looking at that as well, actually, since that also has DLSS 3, so that'll make a good point of comparison. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but to me, with FSR 3 in this game, it felt like I wasn't really getting that 100 frames per second. The motion fluidity didn't feel like it was 110. But other than that, I mean, I didn't see any artifacting or anything like that. So I think it's a pretty good start. And I am impressed, especially with the Fluid Motion Frame feature that AMD has added, which actually works quite well on something like The Last of Us, which I'll be looking at as well. But anyway, not to drag this on and on, this was just to get a conversation going and just my brief look at the game. If you have any comments, leave them below, and if you liked the video, give it a like, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.